you raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
And Dr. Thomas, if you feel comfortable doing so, we'd ask you to remove your mask. I will keep mine on.
I would love that. Thank you.
And let's begin by having you state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Lindsay, Lindsey, Carol, Carol, Thomas, Thomas.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Thomas.
Good morning.
Would you please tell us what kind of a doctor you are?
I'm a forensic pathologist.
And what is a forensic pathologist?
Forensic pathology is that branch of pathology, which is the branch of medicine, where medicine and law overlap. So it could be anything with a medical and legal component. It could be toxicology. In some cases, it may involve living patients, but as I practice and as most forensic pathologists practice, it involves what's called medico-legal death investigation.
Does it involve taking care of patients in the clinical sense?
Not living patients, no. A forensic pathologist may be consulted to help with the evaluation and interpretation of injuries in a living patient, but not in a treatment or clinical sense.
So most of your work then is done on deceased people?
Correct.
Any specific types of deaths?
Yes, the state statutes lists the types of deaths that have to be reported to the medical examiner, and briefly they tend to be unnatural deaths, so accidents, suicides, homicides, unexpected deaths, potentially suspicious deaths, that type of category of death.
Do you get special training in how to determine the cause and manner of death?
Yes.
Tell us something about the special training you received.
Well, should I start back in medical school or just the end part?
Just the end part.
Okay. I did a fellowship in forensic pathology, which is a specified training program for doctors who want to be forensic pathologists to learn how to do medical legal death investigations and certify cause and manner of death.
So would you tell us what pathology is as a field of medicine?
Sure. Pathologists are sometimes considered the doctor's doctor because we don't directly treat patients, but we provide information to doctors who then do treat patients. So, for example, if you've ever been to a lab and had blood drawn, that goes to a laboratory that is run by a pathologist, a clinical pathologist. So, blood count, chemistries, things like that. Or if you've ever known someone that had a biopsy and was diagnosed with cancer, that's the type of pathology that is done by an anatomic pathologist. So you look at tissue and under the microscope and make diagnoses.
Is a medical examiner a forensic pathologist?
In Minnesota, a medical examiner is a forensic pathologist who is appointed by the County Board of Commissioners to be that county's medical examiner.
So it's a public official?
Yes.
So when you talk about the medical legal investigations, is that sort of a fancy way of describing what forensic pathologists do?
Yes, it's what the medical examiner's office does. It's death investigations, again, where there is a medical component and there may be a legal component.
Is it different from, say, a death in a hospital?
Yes. So if someone dies in a hospital, those are usually deaths due to natural causes, and they may have a medical death investigation in the sense that a hospital pathologist might do an autopsy, but they wouldn't do the full scope of the medical legal death investigation because those are mostly due to natural diseases.
What does death investigation entail?
Well, the way a medical examiner's office performs a death investigation, I think a lot of people assume it's all about the autopsy, the physical examination of the body, and that's really just a tiny part of the death investigation. The death investigation really starts at the very beginning when a death is found, a person is found deceased, or the office is notified of the death. We, as medical examiners, want to know all about that person. What's their past medical history, social history, family history. So we will do whatever we need to do to get that kind of history. Then we want to know, well, what happened, what were their terminal events? What happened around the time of their death? Were they complaining of something? Were they interacting with someone? Were they driving? Were they using, machinery, something like that? And then we'll look at the physical examination, and that part of the exam might include x-rays. It could include getting specimens for toxicology, for cultures, for all kinds of other laboratory tests, including looking at things under the microscope, little sections of each organ under the microscope. So that's the physical exam part. Then we'll look at the laboratory results. So that would be usually toxicology, but as I say, it could be blood cultures, or more recently it's probably been a lot of COVID testing, that kind of thing. And then look at the microscopic slides, and then put all of that together with the history, the terminal events, the physical findings, the laboratory findings, and then that's how the medical examiner reaches the conclusion about the cause and manner of death.
So all of that goes into a death investigation?
Yes.
Do you sometimes interview people also as a part of it?
Yes, the investigators who go to the scene may talk to family members. We certainly will talk to medical providers to get someone's past medical history. We often will interview or talk with law enforcement officers if they were the people who responded. It could be paramedics, EMS, troopers, just depends on the case.
I want to ask you about a phrase you use, terminal events.
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury what is a terminal event?
Sure. So when we're investigating a death as medical examiners, as I mentioned, we want to know as much as we can about this person leading up to their death, because that often, how they lived, will provide us information about how they died. When I'm talking about terminal events, I'm talking about what happened in the period of time around their death, shortly leading up to their death. So, for example, he was out shoveling snow, he came in, clutched his chest, and fell over. That would be an example of a terminal event. Or we know someone was driving a car and went off the road. That would be what the terminal events were.
Do you also rely on training and expertise on how injuries occur?
Yes, as a forensic pathologist, that's one of the things we look at and learn about is when we see this type of injury, we associate that with this type of event.
What does the medical examiner then do at the conclusion of a death investigation?
So the ultimate goal is to complete the information that's needed on the death certificate, specifically the cause and manner of death.
Is a report generated?
Yes.
What's the nature of that report?
Well, one of the main reports that's generated would be considered the autopsy report, and that's the report of the physical examination. But ultimately, the death certificate is kind of the final report.
Now, you told us as a forensic pathologist, you don't treat living patients.
Right.
So if we wanted to have a discussion, for example, about measuring lung volumes or air reserves in someone, that wouldn't be your bailiwick as a medical examiner?
That would not be me, no. By the time I see them, none of that applies, yes.
Right. So Dr. Thomas, are you currently employed?
I work, I'm kind of semi-retired. I do consulting, and then I work part-time at medical examiners' offices in Reno, Nevada, and Salt Lake City, Utah.
Reno and Salt Lake City, Dr. Thomas?
There are places I really like the way the office runs, and I like still to be involved as a medical examiner.
And pretty good places to hike.
And good places to hike, yes.
So where did you do your work before you were semi-retired?
Right before I retired, I was at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office as an assistant medical examiner. And do you want me to go before that?
Yes, if you could tell us your work experience as a medical examiner, forensic pathologist.
Sure. Initially, I started after my training at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office, working as a deputy and assistant, then assistant medical examiner, and I was there for many years. And then in 1997, I joined the Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office that was based in Hastings. And then I was chief of that office for 13 years. And we were the medical examiner's office for 8 counties in Minnesota, the largest of which were Dakota and Scott counties. And we also served as an autopsy referral service and medical examiner's office for many other counties in Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin and even one in Michigan. And then when our office outgrew that space, Dakota and Scott counties merged with Hennepin County, and that's why then I came back to Hennepin County.
So over how many years have you performed work or services as a forensic pathologist?
Let's see, 37 now, 36.
And in Minnesota, how many counties?
Oh, gosh. Well, I've been the direct medical examiner for 8 counties. I've worked in offices that have been consultant to dozens of other counties.
And have you also performed those services in parts of Wisconsin?
Yes.
When did you stop working at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office?
It was early 2017. I retired from Hennepin County.
And how many autopsies would you estimate you have performed over your career?
Probably about 5,000 that I myself did, and then hundreds, maybe 1,000 more where I assisted someone else, or I supervised, or I participated in some way.
So in 5,000 or so cases, you've determined the cause and manner of death?
Well, actually way more than that, because as medical examiners, we don't just certify the cause and manner of death for the cases that we do autopsies on. There are numerous other cases that get reported by law to the medical examiner's office where we don't do a physical examination. So, for example, an elderly person falls in a nursing home and gets a hip fracture and then dies a couple months later. That death has to be reported to the medical examiner's office. We will investigate that death by looking at the medical records and doing all of what I talked about, getting family input and medical provider input, but we generally will not do a physical examination, but still, by law, we have to sign the death certificate.
So you're still determining then the cause and manner of death?
Right. We're just not using a physical examination as part of it.
And using the medical records primarily?
Yes.
Dr. Thomas, are you licensed presently?
Yes, I'm licensed in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Tennessee, Nevada, and Utah.
Do you also hold any board certifications?
Yes, I'm board certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
Have you worked with any professional organizations over the years related to forensic pathology?
Yes, I've been a member of many different organizations, Minnesota Medical Association, American Medical Association, College of American Pathologists, American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and then I've been on the board of the Minnesota Coroners and Medical Examiners Association, probably 30 plus years, and then I'm a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners, and I was on that board and a member of their executive committee for a number of years.
And that goes by the acronym NAME, N-A-M-E?
Yes.
What does NAME do?
Well, they're the professional organization of medical legal death investigators, specifically forensic pathologists, medical examiners. And as an organization, they provide support to medical examiners, they provide information, they provide guidelines, an accreditation program, an inspection program, lots of ways of assisting medical examiner offices.
Dr. Thomas, have you done any teaching?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I have been a clinical instructor here at the University of Minnesota Department of Pathology. I've done lots of law enforcement training through the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension here in Minnesota, as well as, oh my gosh, teaching everything from, middle school science students through high school and college and all kinds of professional groups, whether it's other forensic pathologists, other law enforcement, you name the organization that comes into contact with death investigation, and I've probably talked to some of them at some point.
Do you have any publications?
That hasn't been a main focus of my career, but I have several, and early on was involved in an autopsy protocol that was ultimately published by the United Nations that's still in use.
So let's switch topics and talk about your experience testifying in courts. Have you testified before in a court?
Yes, probably over 100 times.
And is that predominantly in your role as a medical examiner?
It's mostly in my role as a medical examiner, where I did the autopsy and then the prosecution would call me to testify as to my findings. I've also testified as an expert witness consultant in cases where I didn't do the autopsy, but I was called by maybe in a civil case, either by the defense or the plaintiff, if they thought there was a wrongful death or some question about medical malpractice, something like that. And then I've also been consulted and testified in cases at the request of the defense, again, not where I did the autopsy, but where I reviewed someone else's work, and then I consulted with the defense or testified.
And have you testified in Minnesota courts?
Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, Pennsylvania. I think those are the ones. Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Thomas, are you being paid for your time and services in this case?
No.
Could you tell us about that? How does it come about that you're not being paid for your time and services in this case?
Well, I didn't ask to be paid.
And so did you reach out to the state, or did the state reach out to you?
No, you reached out to me. And, I knew this was going to be important. And I felt like I had something to offer, and I wanted to do what I could to help explain what I think happened.
So what were you asked to do then in this case?
Well, I was asked to review a lot of the materials and come to an independent conclusion about what I thought the cause and manner of death were and the mechanism for that cause.
Could you give the jurors a general sense or overview of the kinds of materials you reviewed?
May I look at my notes?
Yes, if you need to refresh your recollection.
So I looked at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner materials, including the autopsy report and toxicology and photographs and microscopic slides, things like that. I looked at the Hennepin County Medical Center records, so Mr. Floyd's past medical history from there, as well as Health Partners medical records. Then I looked at a lot of interviews, many videos, including body-worn camera videos, bystander videos, surveillance videos, some photographs, still photographs, timeline, and then some medical literature and textbooks.
So were you the medical examiner who investigated or did the autopsy around the death of George Floyd?
No, that was the Dr. Andrew Baker, the Hennepin County medical examiner.
Do you know Dr. Baker?
I do. He was a pathology resident when I was on staff at Hennepin County many years ago. And then when he did his fellowship, I was one of the staff people there. And then after our offices merged, I worked again with him at Hennepin County.
So would you have been then part of his training in his early formative years?
Yes.
Do you consider him a friend?
I do, yes.
Have you talked to him about this case?
No, not since right after it happened.
But you did review his report?
Yes.
And as well as Mr. Floyd's medical records?
Yes.
Did you review the history of terminal events for May 25th, 2020?
Yes. What was kind of unique, what was absolutely unique in this case was the volume of materials I had to review. I've never had a case like this that had such thorough documentation of the terminal events.
And by way of the thorough documentation, what makes it so thorough, in your opinion?
Well, the use of videos is unique in this case. Certainly, as medical examiners, we use videos, but there's never been a case that I've been involved with that had videos over such a long time frame and from so many different perspectives.
Are you aware then of Dr. Baker's conclusions then on the manner of death?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to show Exhibit 193 that's been stipulated to subject to Dr. Baker's foundation. So first, Dr. Thomas, what do we see here on Exhibit 193?
This is a copy of the certificate of death of Mr. Floyd.
Okay. And so, Brett, if we could kind of highlight just through the word underlying. Just to make it a little bigger to see. Okay. Based on your review of the evidence and the death certificate, do you agree with Dr. Baker's determination on the cause of death?
Yes, I do.
And is that by the word immediate on here?
Yes, cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and neck compression.
Have you, Dr. Thomas, formed an opinion about the mechanism of death?
Yes.
Would you tell us what that is?
In this case, I believe the primary mechanism of death is asphyxia or low oxygen.
So we'll come back to the mechanism in just a minute. Can you explain to the jury what this cause of death means and why you agree with it?
Well, it's kind of in two parts. So there's the cardiopulmonary arrest, which it doesn't provide a lot of additional clarifying information because in a way everyone dies of when your heart stops and your lungs stop. That's cardiopulmonary arrest. But as a forensic pathologist, I would use cardiopulmonary arrest when to differentiate it from a cardiac arrest. So this is not a sudden cardiac death, a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. This is a death where both the heart and lungs stopped working. And the point is that it's due to law enforcement, subdual, restraint, and compression. That is kind of what ultimately is the immediate cause of death, is the subdual, restraint, and compression.